Good afternoon and welcome back to SkanFest U. I was going to wait for the bell to ring. Usually I feel like it's going to come at any moment. But thank you for being here, whether you're here for the first time or the third time now. This is our third session here at SkanFest U on music and nature, which fits many of the musical works that are being programmed at the festival this season. But more broadly, we've been looking for relationships between these two areas and ways in which music and nature are in tune with each other. We've also been looking into specific works of music that have a theme related to nature, and whether that has to do with actual depiction. We started with bird songs a couple of weeks ago. Today we're going to look specifically into water and how music can imitate, so to speak, the sound of water. Last week we focused more on atmosphere, how music creates a certain mood or atmosphere that can be similar to what we find in a natural environment. And today we're going to hone in particularly on feelings, as we're now in the Romantic era, and the Romantics have big feelings. We saw that in the 18th century, nature was seen as a reflection of social harmony among people or between people. And so a lot of the natural scenes have people in them socializing, that just as the birds seem to be happy with each other, people should be happy with each other. So there's an atmosphere of togetherness, of harmony. But as we got into the Romantic era, we saw that nature became a much more solitary kind of experience. That the self was thought to be reflected in the natural world, since we sense nature with the senses that are part of us. They reflect back to us something about ourselves. And so if you want to learn more about yourself, become a better person, become more at ease, go into nature, and you'll discover things that you would never find among other people. So that's a very different attitude than what we have in the 18th century. And that's where we are now, and I'd like to pick up there today. We see these wonderful paintings where you don't even see the face of the person. The back is turned here in one of these paintings by Caspar David Friedrich. The more famous one is this one, The Wanderer, where you essentially become the solitary individual as a viewer, looking out over this vista. What are you learning? What are you feeling? What can you take with you back to civilization? These are the questions and experiences that Romantic artists would like to have, including some composers who we're going to meet in just a moment. It was not only the painters thinking about these things. One of the best sellers, so to speak, of the early 19th century was this book by Byron, the famous poet. It's in verse form. It's called Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, and the idea is that there's this young man, Harold, who is ill at ease in society, and he doesn't exactly know why, but he endeavors to go out into nature and become himself. And Byron inspired a series of other novels of various kinds where the protagonist does just that, goes out into nature to learn. And composers started to follow in his footsteps. Of course, in order to paint an outdoor scene, you have to take your canvas at this time and literally go there. You can't just look for images on the internet. You have to literally go into the mountains if you want to paint the mountains. So there's Turner, with his canvas going out to the sea, and there's water spraying on him. Musicians, too, thought, well, hey, if I want to have these nature experiences, maybe I need to go there as well. So we're going to start with one young man who did just that. He read Childe Harold and decided to go into nature, and for him that meant going from France, where Franz Liszt lived at the time, into Switzerland, where he was painted here. This was painted in Geneva, and you can see the mountains back here. He would go later from there to Italy. But in Switzerland in particular, He went out into nature and then immediately tried to make musical works that would fit with his experiences there. Now, he did not go there alone. He had a secondary motive here. He had recently fallen in love with a young woman who was an aspiring writer herself. So she had a very broad literary experience. She was a countess and very wealthy. She was married previously. That didn't stop Liszt, however. Many countesses and counts were married because their parents chose the match based on wealth, and rarely were they really in love with the person they were married to. So I don't mean to excuse Liszt's behavior. However, he and Marie d'Agoult did run off to Switzerland together. They also had 3 children. Little music trivia here. Their second child, Cosima, later married Richard Wagner. So there's a later musical connection there. Anyways, Marie d'Agoult and Liszt really wanted to follow in the footsteps of Byron's Childe Harold. And so they went out and started to have these nature experiences. And Liszt collected his music, he wrote, into a collection which initially he called the Album of the Voyager. Musical works that would reflect this trip, this going into nature to learn the wisdom of nature. And I wanted to read you the preface to these musical works, and then we're going to hear 1 or 2 of them. And I have that over here, just remembered. So this is Liszt's written preface to his Album of the Voyager, published in 1842. He says, "I have traveled through many new countries," new for him, "have seen many different places, and have visited many a spot hallowed by history and poetry." You can see he's following the poets here. "I have felt that the varied aspects of nature and the different incidents associated with them did not pass before my eyes like meaningless pictures, but they evoked profound emotions in my soul." Now, this is what Liszt is going to try to do for you. Not only to paint the scene that he's seeing for you, but most of all to convey to you as a listener the feelings that he felt when he was in nature. These feelings should be profound, he says, and they should connect with your soul. That's rather ambitious of him, isn't it? "Soon I began to work. My recollections intensified, the various images and ideas combined in order." In other words, the music came into being as he is recollecting on what he saw, what he feels. I'll read you one more passage. Yes, this is now he's going into what he wants music to be someday. Now, Liszt really is very concerned throughout his life with what he called, quote, music of the future. He's trying to write music which does not yet exist, which is more ambitious, more profound, more expansive than anything that has been yet created. And he talks about music of the future here. He says, "It will cease to be merely a combination of sounds and will become a poetic language more apt than poetry itself. Maybe at expressing that within our souls which transcends the common horizon, all that eludes analysis, all that moves in hidden depths of imperishable desire and infinite intuition." And there's that word that the Romantics like, that you should use your intuition. I encouraged you to trust that intuition as you use your own nature experiences to connect with the music, and I'll be asking you what you hear. Now, the first piece that Liszt wrote in his collection is called Orage in French, and it translates as storm or thunderstorm. Now, we heard a storm from Beethoven a couple weeks ago in his 6th Symphony, you might remember. So Liszt is definitely picking up on Beethovenian depiction of nature here, but Liszt is going to use his instrument, the piano in particular. Now, he uses a quote from Byron up here. And many of the pieces here have a quote directly from Childe Harold. And there is a moment in this poem by Byron where the protagonist comes into nature and is bombarded with so many images, and including a storm, that he's just overwhelmed. And you can sense that even in the poetry. Look at how fragmented it is. Sky, mountains, river, winds, lake, lightnings. All of that comes in to the view and the perspective of this individual. And then this last part is what Liszt quotes here of the first stanza. But where of ye, O tempests, is the goal? In other words, what is the purpose of this storm? Why? Are ye like those within the human breast? We all have our personal storms, right? Or do you find at length, like eagles, some high nest? Is there something beyond the human? The fact that Byron is asking questions is important, because Liszt is going to want to do that in music too. He's asking questions about music, about can music show us the great, or help us experience and understand these great questions of life? What is the meaning of nature? Is it related to who I am? Are the storms within me the storms that we hear on the outside? So take a listen to a little bit of this work called Orage, or Storm, by Liszt. And this connects with something that the Romantics are very concerned with, called the sublime, right? You've probably heard of this. It's that which exists in nature, which is overpowering, shocking, maybe strikes fear within you, is beyond your human understanding even. It could connect to the divine, but we don't know that for sure, the sublime. So I think Liszt is trying to give you a taste of that in musical form. And it continues like that for the whole piece. Forgive me for not playing that one for you myself. I did not have time to practice that this week. Yeah, tell me what you're hearing. What does this do for you as a listener? What are you thinking or feeling when you hear such music? Anguish. Okay, so that immediately goes to an emotion associated with this storm. Yeah, anything else? Yes?
Very tempestuous. It just sounds like a ton of rain being poured down at once.
That's a great image, that the fierceness of it. It's truly tempestuous in almost a bewildering way, right? You can hardly hear the individual notes coming out of the piece. It's chaotic. Yes?
I hear a thunderstorm and emotion that feels turmoil.
Yes. Yes. So the turmoil connects to the storm itself. And again, this is what the Romantics are concerned with, is how does nature provoke feelings within you, and what is the meaning of those feelings? Do they connect with your life? in some way, even though nature is an inanimate object, but like a storm, but still it connects to the human somehow. The use of virtuosity in particular to connect with nature is something Liszt, I think, added to the equation. We haven't really seen it that much yet in our class, that the quality of physical energy, you know, that high level energy is important to him. And we can imagine, you know, that it takes some of that physical energy to be present for a storm like this one. Now, Liszt's pieces are not all this way. Many of the pieces are more serene and reflective, because that's something nature does very well for us too, right? We can go out into it. If we feel the serenity of nature, that provokes other thoughts and feelings, very different from a storm. So I wanted to give you a contrast of another piece by Liszt. He and Marie Dagoul came upon this lake in Switzerland. It's a long, narrow lake. You're welcome to visit it yourselves if you want. It's still there. A lake, there's a little town at the end called Wallenstadt. And I found a painting of it, which I think is a nice representation of it. And Liszt and Marie Dagoul sat on the banks together and spent some time there. And then Liszt wrote a piece called At the Lake at Wallenstadt, this pictured here. And again, he used a quotation from Lord Byron that has to do with the lake, again from Childe Harold. And here the quote says, "Thy contrasted lake with the wild world that I dwell in is a thing which warns me with its stillness to forsake earth's troubled waters for a purer spring." A purer spring. Of course, our lake here can do that as well, right? You go to the lake and then you leave your troubles behind, right? The lake tells you sometimes simplicity is better. Sometimes you just need a little serenity, right? And that gives you a perspective on life. This is the idea, that you gain wisdom even from going to such a place, from experiencing such a place. Now, just as Liszt was illustrating or depicting the storm, he's going to depict the gentle rocking waves of the lake here. And the left hand in particular, he asked the pianist to do something rather difficult, to be honest. It's to spread the hand out really widely so that it can resonate these notes together. Whereas classical composers, they like figures such as this one. Mozart uses that all the time. Liszt does this. So the piano uses sonority. We heard a little bit of that last week. And it has a sort of gentle rocking quality. And above that, you're going to have a melody. Now, we found last week that a melody is often the best way of situating the presence of a single individual in the natural surroundings. Because a melody is like what you would sing, right? A single person would sing a melody, and therefore that often in romantic music represents one individual, which could be the composer, could be Liszt, or it could be you as the listener. You're the solitary individual hearing. Now, for this particular piece, Liszt uses a folk-like melody. I'm not sure it's really Swiss, but it has a simplicity to it that fits with Byron's quote here, that we should find a purer spring and not be so concerned with our day-to-day troubles. That's quite a contrast from the storm we heard earlier. Would anyone be willing to share their thoughts or feelings when you're hearing this piece of Liszt? What does it do for you as a listener? Yes.
The spring was almost like a spring rain.
Sure, I can see that. It's kind of, it lulls you in a way with that constant sound of the waves or the water. Oh, I'm sorry. She said it's almost like a spring rain, like a light rain that you have. Yeah. Anyone else? Yes, in the back.
I was imagining it's just very peaceful and quiet with someone sort of taking their time going through the feel of flowers.
Yeah, taking your time. That's good. That's what reflection is about, right? You're able to be reflective if you're calm and take time. Yeah, there was another hand back there.
Sorry, I agree with her. That's what I was saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like, it sounds like sitting like walking along a stream,
Mm-hmm.
and there might have been a rain,
Mm-hmm.
and the leaves are dripping in different ways, and the leaves are falling, and animals are running by making noise, with this background,
Mm-hmm.
this
Sure.
running.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so many of you have focused first, and I think rightly so, on the scene, right? The visual. But Liszt had asked us in his preface to move beyond the visual toward the feelings, the thoughts and the feelings that the scene inspires. Of course, that's subjective, right? That depends on you as a listener. And it could be quite different depending on which listener you are. Anybody be willing to share either a thought that the music makes you think or a feeling? Yes.
Very serene.
Okay.
Peaceful.
Okay. So that's the feeling of serenity, yes?
Psalm 46:1, be still and know that I'm God.
Okay. So maybe there's an experience of the divine in that moment of stillness. And I think the Romantics are very open to that. Whether it's a particular God, it depends on the composer and the listener and so forth. But yes, thank you. That makes sense to me too. Marie Dagoul, Liszt's partner, who was there, wrote in her diary, Liszt has written this piece. We were just at the lake. And she said she found the piece, quote, exceptionally melancholy. Which I think is very interesting because personally I don't hear it that way. I hear the serenity and I hear the stillness, but I feel peaceful. I don't really feel melancholy, but she did. She said, I can't listen to it without starting to cry. But that's the mystery of emotions, right? In fact, stillness, peacefulness, and melancholy might all be connected somehow within us. So I don't think we should assume that the emotions being, called upon here are simple or uniform. Maybe there's a complexity there as well, an emotional complexity that nature brings out in us. So I wanted to give you an alternative perspective on water before we move to orchestral music briefly. Because we're going to be exploring the rest of the class this genre of water music which depicts water. It turns out that the piano is very good at this because the notes, can be like droplets of water or waves, and the pedal creates a certain resonance. And a couple years after Liszt published this piece, Chopin wrote a piece called Barcarolle. Does anyone know what a barcarolle is? Yes? Yes, exactly, in Venice. Yes, it's a boat song that a Venetian boatman might sing. Chopin never went to Venice. So this is the other thing about these scenes. Sometimes they're purely imaginary. Of course, he had heard about Venice. But he uses the water in an interesting way, and I'd like to share just an excerpt of that piece with you. Barcarolle by Chopin. Here, he does something similar to Liszt, by using the left hand to create the waves. So just as a reminder, Liszt's waves sounded like this. And Chopin's waves are going to be like this. So there are similarities, right? They're in the same register of the piano, but the movement of them is a little bit different. Liszt's is a little more placid, and Chopin's, they're rocking a little bit. They have this rocking feeling going. Again, the purpose of the music is not just to depict nature, but really to explore the emotions that the natural scene provides, or the water in this case. Venice is one of the most painted cities. It certainly was in the 19th century. I feel like I had one for you somewhere, but I wonder if I can find it, by Turner, who, yeah, here we go. So, frequently painted since it's such a unique place. So I gather that Chopin had seen Venice in paintings and probably heard about it, but never had the opportunity to go there. But I'm guessing that some of you have. Here's a little bit of the barcarolle. What I'd like you to listen for, the melody which comes in, again, could represent you as a listener or Chopin as a composer. But there's a moment which I'd like to play for you about halfway through the excerpt, where the melody falls out and you really just have the water. And the water is kind of, it's moving, but more importantly, the light is based on the clouds. The color of the water is changeable. It shifts, it becomes darker and lighter. And Chopin has a wonderful way, I think, of doing this in the middle of this excerpt from the barcarolle. just an excerpt of Chopin's Barcarolle, and this is Chopin playing with water in a way, right? Any thoughts or feelings with which the music brings you as a listener, if you're willing to share? Yes.
Two things. I've been to Venice, I've seen the boats, and there's a sense, the collection of them moving waves, but also the feeling of joy, and it felt like they were surging forward and are free from their captivity.
Yeah, the way boats rise on the water that way. Yeah, the music can do that too. Yeah, music can move like a boat. It can ebb, it can flow, it can soar on the waves. Yeah, thank you. Any feelings, since we're in the Romantic era, is the music causing you to feel anything in particular that you're able or willing to articulate? Yes.
You could imagine when it's very peaceful, soft in the beginning, and then it builds, that maybe it's going into rougher waters. That's a possibility. I was thinking of it, though, the way I saw it. I mean, it just sort of came to my mind. That he was actually moving from outward, looking at the waves, to inward, and staying with what's in his mind. And then when he comes back at the end to the more peaceful, it's like he puts his mind back on, like, if you're meditating and
yes.
You're trying to focus on what's there, but your mind goes somewhere else.
Yeah, thank you. So the music might portray in a way what happens in our minds as we're reflecting, or Chopin's mind. So there's an interior quality to it. And I think that fits with Chopin's music. It's introspective. Not to stereotype them, but Liszt is a little more outwards, right? And Chopin, it's almost as if you're looking into the water and reflecting on the light, but then there are thoughts you're having, and the music is like those thoughts. And that's just what nature is able to do for us as well. It gives us thoughts we would not otherwise have, right? Or reflections or feelings that we would not otherwise have. So although the nature is being depicted in the music, it's really those thoughts and feelings which seem to concern the composers most, not just the depiction of the waves. Yes?
And I kind of wanted to touch on the point you made earlier about the melancholy, and that it's not a denial that what in front of you is beautiful. Sometimes we feel like we don't deserve it. We see this peacefulness and beauty, and it's like, who am I to experience this?
Yeah, well, there's all...
This is kind of like maybe Chopin's overthinking like what he's looking at.
Yeah, there's a sense of wonder that this beautiful sight, it may cause us to ask questions about the nature of me versus the nature of that, the external world. Those are big questions the Romantics are asking about themselves, and certainly these composers were asking that as well. Before we leave the Romantics, and we're going to move into the 20th century in a moment, just to turn to a little bit of orchestral music, Liszt, he lived probably the most interesting life in music that I know of. He was this virtuoso pianist that toured around everywhere. Well, after a while he got tired of that, so he retired at the age of 38. And he became a conductor and focused on orchestral music. He's pictured here in the German town of Weimar. He was one of the first modern conductors, which is to say that he would show the orchestra, when to go faster, when to go slower, like that. In Beethoven's time, you might be surprised if you don't know it already, that there was rarely a conductor at all playing with the orchestra. And Beethoven's symphonies tend to be more rhythmically stable. Well, Liszt was pioneering a new kind of music, which was more flexible, and he saw that music could illustrate really quite well, but that it could also convey feelings very well. And so he pioneered a new kind of music, which he called a symphonic poem. And in many cases, his symphonic poems are actually prefaced by real poetry that he took and then tried to turn into musical form in one way or another. And his very first tone, what became known as a tone poem, but he called it a symphonic poem, was based on a poem, a real poem, by Victor Hugo in French, which translates roughly to what was overheard on the mountain. It's a giant piece of music, and it's not very well known, I think partially because its length. It's maybe 40 minutes or so. It's pretty big. But he had this idea that he could portray the natural world, but also the feelings that it gives us and the questions, most of all, that the natural world, the wonders of the natural world, can make us ask about ourselves. And so Victor Hugo, who is a great hero of Liszt's, author of Les Miserables, for example, Hunchback of Notre Dame, writes in his poem that he distinguished, confused and veiled, as he was out on the mountain, two voices, one mingled with the other, of the earth and of the seas pouring out up to the heaven, which sang together the universal song. And I distinguished them in the deep, far sound as one sees two streams that cross under the wave. One was coming from the seas, song of glory, happy hymn. It was the voice of the waves talking together. The other, which arose from the earth where we are, was sad. It was the murmur of men. And in this great concert, singing day and night, each wave had its own voice and each man his noise. So Liszt tried to turn this into music, and he created themes. The theme of the sea, the so-called eternal hymn in Hugo's words. The voice of nature. Now this one, the second one, is like a bird descending and then going back up, and you'll hear that. So you can see the bird kind of coming down and going back up from the sky. Then you have what Liszt calls a hymn to God. That one is more, well, I guess what you would expect, hymn-like. It's more stable, forceful. And then you have the dissonance of suffering humanity, which uses this half step. Human suffering, and then especially you'll hear the next one, this one. That F sharp is a dissonant note, and it leans into that. It portrays human suffering. You can see how ambitious Liszt is here, right? He's trying to convey in musical form this natural scene, but also the meaning of life in a way. Like, what does nature teach us? How is it different from us? How is it similar? Liszt combines all these themes together in the tone poem, and he pioneered something he would call thematic transformation, which is that a theme starts off in a certain form, but it changes as it goes, and it morphs into something else. And that is illustrative of our journey through life, right? We change as people as we age. We retain something of our identity, but we're constantly changing. So music could do that as well. Now, we don't have time to go into this piece in a lot of detail, but I did want to just listen to a little bit as Liszt tries to combine these different themes to illustrate, quote, what was overheard on the mountain. So here's a little excerpt of Liszt's symphonic poem, the first ever such symphonic poem. Before that, we have symphonies, right? First movement, second movement, third movement. This is all one movement with a programmatic narrative of the themes as they go through. So here's a little excerpt of that. The bird of nature, and the human. Suffering humanity. to God. Here's the bird again. Okay, I'm going to stop it there. Quite exciting, isn't it? Exciting and a little bewildering, too. You have so many themes coming together here. You can sense the ambition that Liszt has. Liszt had a description of this. He says, this is just describing the music you just heard, the poet, by which he also means the musician, I think. The poet hears two voices, the first immeasurable, splendorous, well-ordered, soaring heavenwards to the Lord in jubilant hymns of praise. The other, dull, rent with pain, swollen with tears, blasphemy and curses. The one cries, nature, and the other, humanity. The two voices grope ever closer to each other, crossing and fusing until ultimately they resolve and die away in pious contemplation. That's a great description of kind of the whole romantic project of going into nature and struggling and finding. And it's a very ambitious representation of this piece that Liszt is trying to do for you. So you get a little taste of that as well. Now, this romantic direction would not last forever, although we carry something of the romantics within us, right? Still, even today. But in the 20th century, Romanticism, at least in France and in Paris, gave way to something else called symbolism, which picks up on some of the mysticism of Romanticism, but becomes more mysterious and vague. The basic idea, which was laid out in a poem by Charles Baudelaire, the great French poet, he says that nature is a temple in which living pillars sometimes emit confused words. Man crosses it through forests of symbols that observe him with familiar glances. Wow. It's a different view of nature, okay? That nature is a forest of symbols that contains meaning, but that meaning is mysterious and vague, and we may never get to the bottom of it. So that's a much more vague, mystical idea. Nature emits confused words. That's not something you think of in that serene lake environment. This is something else. And it captivated painters, musicians at this time, this view of nature as containing symbols. One of the great painters of the era, Redon, was also a violinist, actually, even performed. He created these nature scapes, but the figures float freely through them. It's not realistic in any way. You can see the trees and you can see the people, but good luck interpreting what this means. And that's just the point. It should be beyond our precise interpretation. That opens for you a gateway toward mystery. And that is sort of, in a nutshell, the essence of symbolism. This fascinated Claude Debussy, whose music we'll hear in just a moment. Now, Debussy, Ravel, other French composers were captivated by the visual arts, not only these symbolist painters, but to bring in a painting that you probably know by Claude Monet. He created this painting in 1872, Impression Sunrise. It caused a lot of controversy because it was thought to be too vague, not precise enough. Look at that sloppy brushwork, said one critic. Right? This was also the foundation of another movement which dovetails with symbolism but is different, called Impressionism. And you're familiar with that from the visual arts, I'm sure, many of you. It has to do with the title of this painting, Impression, that music can give you an impression. Now, I'd like to play a short work by Ravel, and then we're going to hear finally a prelude by Debussy. If my trumpeter has a little time to wait for 5 minutes, is that okay? All right, great. So nature was kind of a pathway or a gateway for some of these composers. And Ravel, who had a good knowledge, he was a pianist, as you can see here, Maurice Ravel, he had a good knowledge of earlier piano music. I'm sure he knew these pieces by Liszt and Chopin we just heard. But in his first big piano piece, 1901, he does something very interesting, which is to remove the melody from the piece. So far, the pieces we've heard always have a melody. And again, that represents you as a listener or the composer as a solitary individual. But now Ravel is going to take that out. This is a piece called Playing with Water, or Jeu d'eau, from 1901. And he's exploring here something we call in music texture. Texture is like the fabric of your clothes, right? We think textile. It has a surface. The feel of it is important. It could be smooth, it could be rough. And music, we say, has a texture, even though it really doesn't. It's just sound. But based on the density of the notes and how high and low they are, we say that music has a kind of a texture. And that is distinct from melody, something you can sing. So here, Ravel is going to explore this texture in this piece called Playing with Water. You may listen again. What does the music make you think or feel? What a magical piece that is. It uses the piano in a whole new way for 1900. It asks a lot of the pianist, a lot of notes. But what a great depiction of water, isn't it? Now, this piece undoubtedly inspired Debussy to explore his own pathway for the piano. And I have one final work for you today. And I'm very happy to welcome to the stage Chris Coletti, our trumpet player for the week. He is very graciously saving us. Brandon Ridenour, who was to be here, cannot be here. He has a family emergency. Everyone's fine, but he has to take care of that, so he couldn't join us. However, he made these transcriptions of music by Debussy, which we'll hear in the concert on Thursday, so this is a little bit of a sneak preview. Chris, you're from Ithaca, I think, right? Or you live in Ithaca? Live in Ithaca, yeah. So we're really, really thrilled. Some of you may be wondering, what is this instrument he's holding? Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, so this is actually a flugelhorn. Has anyone seen this before? So the trumpet has a cool history. The trumpet was an instrument of war, and it communicated by shouting from mountaintop to indicate danger. And the flugelhorn was a bugle that was used more recently. And so, I'm sorry, the bugle predates the flugelhorn. So a trumpet is one of those old military trumpets with valves, and a flugelhorn is a bugle with valves. So that's why it has this kind of wide bell. But it's more of a mellow sound, and I thought it was just perfect for this Debussy.
Thank you for that introduction to the instrument. This piece by Debussy is called Bruyère in French, which means heathers. Presumably the flower, although there is also a town in France called Bruyère, so it's possible it has something to do with the town, but certainly the flower is part of it. We can imagine a kind of landscape here that you would be in as an individual. And although we don't know exactly the landscape that inspired Debussy here, some people think it portrays the Scottish Highlands, the flowers there. Other people think it portrays the coast of Brittany. One pianist who was very close to Ravel said, and Debussy both, Marguerite Long, said that it's, quote, the smell of the sea mist mixed with coastal pines. Well, in any case, most likely it's an imaginary landscape that you walk through as a listener. Parts of it are very contemplative, reflective. There's a moment in the middle which is more euphoric. And then there's also a moment later which is a little bit more nostalgic. Again, landscapes like this in nature can cause all of those thoughts and feelings within us in the moment. So you might think about what would occupy your mind and heart in this particular musical landscape. Bruyère by Debussy. So thank you for staying a couple minutes past time. Wonderful to hear Chris and have a little sneak preview. He just escaped from his rehearsal downstairs. They're rehearsing Stravinsky's Soldier's Tale for Friday night, so he's very busy today. Nice to come here. Just a couple notes as you leave today. As always, we have a little reception prepared for you with wine. Next week, we're going to have a very special guest, Curtis Waterman, who is from the Onondaga Nation. He's a musician, plays the Native American wood flute, which he's going to be bringing for us next week. I hope you can join us for that. And he's also, in order to share some of his culture with you, is preparing some food for the reception afterwards. Some food from the Onondaga Nation. So I hope you'll be able to join us for that next week as well. We do have also this week some nature works. There's, of course, Schubert's Trout Quintet on Thursday. You'll hear the leaping trout there. We also have a piece called A Fish from South Africa, which is connected to the Trout Quintet. And on Saturday night, out at the Vineyard, we hope, we have a new work which is being premiered called Woodland Songs, an orchestra version of a string quintet by Jerod Impichchaachaaha Tate, who will be with us next week. And each movement is named after an animal, raccoon, fish, and others. I'll discuss this piece a little bit with you next week, but you'll hear it on Saturday night. And those animals and actually provide the names for the different clans in his people, the Chickasaw people, and are very important, and the spirit of the animal is important to his culture. So you can listen out for that on Saturday night. Thank you again for being here, and see you next week.